Hello and welcome to Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I am joined by Dr. Fantasy himself, the Nemesis, the evil Dark Lord. I thought.
Hello, Professor Fireballs. It is wonderful to be here. I'm excited to be here. A, because I get to talk to you and give you a hard time. And B, because we are here to discuss Forge of the High Mage by Ian C. Esslemont. And I'm excited. I'm excited. This was a fantastic read. It was so wonderful to be back in the Malazan world for me.
This is, I think we should clear something up here because we're going to have a chat about this.
Yeah.
But most people now know that I advance read for Stephen Erickson and Ian C. Esslemont.
Yep.
And the book hasn't been published yet in the US. And in circumstances like that, I tend to be, whether or not other people think you have to be, but I tend to be quite constrained in what I say about these books because I was involved in a certain level. And the thing is, if I weighed in and said, "Oh, I really love this book," people who didn't go, "Oh, well, of course he is going to say that because he knows the author, he advanced read for it." If I said I hated the book, people go, "Oh, well, and suddenly there would be this whole controversy. So typically with a lot of these books, I don't generally talk about them until much later on, and then I tend to stick to analysis. But I thought it would be fun to talk to you about it.
Oh, yes, it will be fun. I have a question for you, though. How does it feel to see your name in the acknowledgements like that? You can say that, right? You can talk about that.
Well, it never gets old.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. And it's a bit like I know people who have written reviews for magazines or blogs or things like that, and the first time a quotation from, say, something you wrote ends up on a book cover, you get this. I wrote that. No, you're pointing at a book and people, you wrote that book. You're like, no, I didn't write the book. I wrote the phrase that's at the front of the book.
Yeah.
And it is really nice to see your name being printed and for an author to thank you, because authors are under no obligation to do that, and it's just nice to be recognized and to feel that you contributed somehow to them articulating and publishing their story.
Yeah. Well, it must mean that Ian Esslemont and Stephen Erickson, because he also acknowledges you, must be at least somewhat happy with your advice.
I don't know if I would say happy. They put up with it. But
Great.
you know exactly what it's like. That when
I do.
when
Yeah.
I had a look at your work and I gave you feedback, there was some of the feedback that I gave, and you looked at it and went, "No, I'm not doing that."
Yeah. It's
And
true.
because you have your reasons for why you want to do something, and so
Yeah.
any editor, because again, an editor's job is not to rewrite your story. An editor's job is to help an author get the best possible version of that story. And so
Right.
by highlighting things that could be changed, highlighting things that you might want to think about in a different way, by suggesting certain things that you do realize this could be read in this light, and I don't think that's what you mean. There's a lot of stuff like that goes on, and an editor can make or suggest changes, can suggest different ways of doing things. But ultimately, it comes down to the author and the author's vision. And no matter what I said, and of course, I was always right, you did not necessarily follow that advice because you went, "No, but the thing I want to do is this." And
Right.
I am aware of that particular reaction, and that's okay. That's the cost of doing the thing that I want to do.
Yeah.
Which is the best type of author to work with. Someone who will listen to you, who will listen to your reasoning, and they're open to what you say. But at the end of the day, they still have a vision of their story, and they incorporate the things that you tell them and the feedback that you give them. They incorporate that and see if it can help them reshape their story.
Yeah, yeah. Which is, of course, why you can't be too detailed in, I guess, your take on this, having been involved. But I'm happy to spill my guts.
Well, and okay then. So let's start with it. We'll start with general non-spoiler kind of stuff, and then we'll let people know when we're moving into discussion of specifics and have a bit of a spoiler section. That's it.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so you can help me in a moment when I start talking about themes, and you just add whatever you want. But I really, really loved this book. As a story, it was just beautiful from the beginning to be back in Malazan. And as I said, and now that doesn't necessarily make it in and of itself a great book, does it? This is a world I love. I spend a lot of time in, and I appreciate all the series in the world. I will say that this is a great book in and of itself too, though, because the momentum was great. I just loved how the last couple hundred pages of this, I was so engaged, so just turning pages, wanting to know what's going to happen with these characters and these arcs and everything else. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I also really loved getting to some backstory on some characters that I thought I knew. And this is, hey, it's Malazan, so be prepared to find out stuff about characters that will make you see them in a new light. Both Malazan authors do this to me all the time. And this is a great example of it. There are some key, I can't say which ones because we're not doing spoilers right now, but there are some major characters in here that I really, really feel like, oh, I kind of feel like I know what makes this person tick now. Several, actually. And a couple where my opinions of these characters, my assessment has altered in some interesting ways. And a couple where I'm like, yep, that's kind of how I felt about this character before.
I think I can guess which of the characters that you have not changed your opinion on.
I reckon you can.
He did nothing wrong.
Right. We'll see about that when we get to the spoilers. So that was fun. And this is I've always felt that Esslemont is so gifted when it comes to atmosphere and giving me a sense of place. And I love that. Now, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that this takes place in a part of the Malazan Empire that we haven't really visited, to my recollection, too much. The Falar Isles.
We know people from that area.
Right, but we haven't been there much. I think we've been there in some memories from characters like Fiddler, who's from there originally. There are some memories here and there, but really I don't feel like there's any story that's just mainly set there. So that was cool. Really, Esslemont is just so cool how he gives us these views of these different parts of the Malazan world that often are areas where Steven Erikson hasn't really visited in his series. So just fantastic. And you get some insight into those characters like Fiddler, because they're from this part of the world, and then you kind of understand them a little bit more, I think. So
now I had a question. At that edition that you have, are there maps at the front and maps at the back?
There's a map in the front. And by the way, I got this particular book from a very wonderful, nice, kind person who sent it to me, since it's not out here in the United States. So I have connections, so. so I have this map in the beginning, which
right.
I kind of took that initially. I took this at face value, and you've got the Falar area here, and you've got 7 cities off here, and then you get this map in the back, and there's talk. I don't think it's a spoiler.
No, it's not a spoiler to say that there are 2 maps in it.
Yeah.
And we can talk about this.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about this is this is something that we see. There's a supposition that every big fantasy series, there's always a map, and that's actually a fallacy. There isn't always a map. Quite a few of them.
Less than 50% of fantasy books have a map, which is you crushed another one of my Assumptions, AP. Thank you.
But one of the interesting things is if you ever talk to an actual cartographer about the history of maps, you realize that our modern perception of what a map is, how it should look, and what it reflects is incredibly modern and very, very specific, because that's not how maps in lots of different circumstances used to be. And
absolutely.
even when we look at, you can look at maps that are in certain textbooks as late as the 1980s and 1990s, that the political bias of the map maker is actually visible in, well, where is the map centered? And why is north at the top and south at the bottom? That's arbitrary. Why not? Why isn't north on the left-hand side of the page and south on the right-hand side of the page? You go, because that's the way up the globe is. It's a globe floating in space. The up and down on this axis is entirely arbitrary, but there are reasons why it becomes a convention, and it can be tied into culture, it can be tied into psychology, it can be tied into politics, and the relative size of places.
Right.
It's not always accurate, because again, we're taking a 2D flat piece of paper to model a three-dimensional globe onto, and so it doesn't actually fit neatly. That there are going to be areas where there are little stretches here and compressions there in order to make it fit neatly onto a flat page. And so all of these things add into the fact that a lot of maps are illusionary about their accuracy. And if we think of the Malazan world, if you are on a ship and you're mapping the coast, then you're very concerned about the coastal coves and where can we put in safely and where is there good fishing. So you'll spend more space detailing that on the map than, oh well, it looks like mountains over there, just stick in some mountains on the map, because you're not concerned about inland. If you're marching an army over the inland area, you're going to be much more concerned about you go, oh well, the coast is just kind of over there, but that's not where we need to know what's in around this. Where are the rivers? Where can we get fresh water? That suddenly that becomes the focus, and those areas become detailed. And then you would hope there'd be a composite. So Ericsson and Esslemont began a sort of fake rivalry between two fake cartographers in the Malazan world. Farut and Wessel. And that's why there are two different maps of the same area, and they're not the same map.
They're wildly different. And it's interesting because, as you said, mariners are going to be more concerned by that with coastlines and that sort of thing. And it makes sense that back in the day, back in older times, who would be most concerned with maps? Well, people who are exploring, which would be mostly mariners and that sort of thing. But it's very similar to how I think Ericsson and Esslemont poke fun at historians a lot. They're doing it to cartographers now. Which is, it's this assumption, it's a somewhat arrogant assumption of our knowledge, our accuracy, being so firm, and this is the way the world is. Yes. And whoops, nope, actually, there's this other way of seeing it, which is in fact contradictory. So guess what? Then this is a very Malazan thing to do. Yeah.
And you're exactly right, because that's the point I was going to make, that in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which was written as a history, and people went, oh, so this is exactly what happened. And you go, no, it is a history that there is an author behind it that is crafting it for a specific purpose. Then novels of the Malazan Empire. Well, Esslemont changed things. And you go, no, this is Esslemont's version of events. Because remember, when we all watch the same event, we may have different recollections or different ways of describing it, or even interpret it in radically different ways. And so they were playing with that notion of narrative being static. That was something that both of them were playing with. The idea that history is static, that they were deconstructing that. Both of these authors did that. And it has happened across all of their different series.
Yeah, even the same author will contradict himself. Like if you look at Carcanus, there are things that you just cannot square with the Malazan Book of the Fallen. They're contradictory accounts of the same character in some cases. So it's that's what they do. Yeah.
And you know, I know that some people get dissatisfied by that, or they don't enjoy that playfulness because they went, no, I want to know exactly what happened. You know,
But it's
but
fiction.
none of it happened. But it's that conceit that we have when we read fiction. We read it as real.
Yeah.
And sometimes when people are playing with that and playing into it and manipulating that, if you are locked into that one mode of reading, that can actually be very disruptive to your enjoyment, where you go, oh, well, that's just a retcon. And you go, well, yes, no, maybe it's a different way of telling the same story. It's a different emphasis on things, but that character should have known that. Yeah, maybe like they did game a lot of this stuff back in the 1970s and 1980s. It's been a while, and some of these sequences, because again, I think people overstate quite how much of any of these series was actually gamed. They seem to think that, oh, they played the game, they know exactly what happened. No,
Yeah.
that is overstating it quite significantly. There's stuff based on elements they gamed, but it's not the same as, oh, we played through, here's my script for what happened, I'll just write this out. But even people talking about that's Ericsson's character or that's Esslemont's character. And from so many different interviews, we know that sometimes Ericsson, as the GM, was controlling a character as an NPC. But then when Esslemont was GMing, he needed that character, so he controlled the character. And it may be that one of them created it, or created the character, or one of them used that character the most, or it was a player character for that character.
Right.
But there was a lot of flexibility in characters moving backwards and forwards between them. And so because of that, both authors know all of the characters pretty well, but they know them sometimes from different perspectives.
And that's another fun thing, is to sometimes get Esslemont's version of a character that you're used to seeing in Ericsson's work. That's a lot of fun as well. So themes, I think we can start talking about themes. One that really stuck out to me, and since you're familiar with my own writing, you probably can see why. I think Esslemont of the two actually has done much more with this theme than Ericsson. I'm thinking of some of the novels of Malazan Empire, like Stonewielder especially. Religion is a big theme that Esslemont deals with very squarely in Stonewielder, and now again here in Forge of the High Mage. And how, without spoilers still, how the current incarnation or version of a religion may in some ways not be exactly what it was hundreds of years ago. Religions change, folks. Our interpretations of key documents, these change. Our ideas about central aspects of the religion evolve. I mean, that's the way humans are, I'm afraid. So I really love this theme as Esslemont handles it. I think really in some ways very subtly, and also at the same time though it's a very central thing to this story, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think part of it is anytime you're talking about religion, even in a fantasy setting, sometimes there's a level of sensitivity I think that is nice to apply to it, because people will see parallels between their own faith, their own belief, and what is happening in a fantasy novel. If they're so inclined.
They can.
And because of that, I think authors who use fantasy as a way to discuss themes of religion, which a number of fantasy authors have done very well and quite interestingly, but sometimes it's used almost as a cudgel to criticize organized religion.
Yeah.
That all organized religion is corrupt, and that can be a bit blunt and lacking in nuance. What I liked in part in this particular exploration is that it's not just the religion, because again, there are splinter factions, there are different almost like cults within these different movements and factions that are pushing for certain interpretations, a different way or the way to look at something. This is the orthodox view. You have a divergent opinion and you are different, you need to be punished. Whereas other people are going, no, no, our view is orthodox. Like, how much does that strike us about looking at any major religion that you can see, oh, well, we're the normal ones here, but those people way out on the fringes, oh, they're mad. I don't know what they're doing. And yet we know that different factions, different elements of any major religion sometimes see other aspects of that religion and go, they're nearly right. Like, they are one of us, but they're a wee bit wrong. We're the only ones who have it all
Right.
correct. Because that's what part of what faith is in your religion, is that you've found the one that is speaking the truth to you.
And it's very much tied to another theme that Esslemont does so well, and that is another one that is actually fairly prominent, not accidentally, in Stonewielder, but also it's all over Malazan, where you have a native population that is displaced, or that is there's some kind of aggression where another wave of people come and pretty much take most of the power and exploit the native people of that particular place. And it's interesting to watch how certain things get appropriated by the colonizing people. They do a lot of appropriating and then assume, oh, this has always been ours. And they forget that actually, no, you got this from these people that you actually don't treat very well right now. So it's really, I mean, that's a very simplistic way of summarizing the various layers of peoples that you have here in the Malazan world, and it's a wonderful thing that both authors do, actually, but it's something that really I found very well done in here in Forge of the High Mage, where you have these, and again, without spoilers, when the original native people, there's yet another party that comes from outside. Where are their loyalties going to be? And this is a complex play of identity. Have they identified with their oppressors to the extent that they want to be loyal to them, or is this an opportunity? It's an interesting play here that we see in the history of humanity again and again and again.
And that is something that we see in that because of personal loyalties being at odds from a cultural loyalty, or the historical precedent that's been set, that people change and shift over time, and that can actually lead to changes and shifts in cultural or national loyalties. But for me, that is part and parcel of an overarching element in this about power as an individual choice, as the power of belief, the power of magic in this instance, of the different religions, of politics, and treating that sort of mundane power. That there are all of these different elements, and then that is in dialogue with military power, with cultural power, that these different ways of expressing how powerful someone is, because we're used to that. Oh, who's the most powerful character? You go, in what sense? Because it's a fun conversation to have when you're sitting around with your friends. Who would win in a fight? Oh, who's the most powerful? That's great fun. But when we actually start digging into it, someone who can manipulate and wield an entire religion, how powerful are they? Someone who can use their magical abilities to create havoc or devastation, how powerful are they? Someone who can command armies, or someone who is an excellent swordsman. That all of these are different ways of expressing power, and how those powers interrelate, clash, and support one another. That blending of these different approaches, these different spheres of power, and how certain factions within it try to find a balance. and what it can mean on an individual level, and what it can then, that individual level, how it can then build to something on a societal level. And I thought that was a very interesting dynamic within the story.
Yeah, yeah. And yet another one that's very much linked to, actually, that's a great segue to what I was thinking about for another theme, and something we see a lot from both authors, and it is partly tied to the whole perspective business, where in many Malazan books, you're with multiple characters from different, often clashing cultures, and because you know characters from both cultures, you when you're with this character, you're on their side. When you're with this character, you're on their side, and when they get together, you're very confused because you don't know who you want to win. The fact of the matter is, the Malazan Empire is an empire, and it is an acquisitive empire. And this is, Path to Ascendancy is the story of how the Malazan Empire came to be, essentially, in some way.
I'm not sure. I wouldn't frame it that way. I think a lot of the Path to Ascendancy novels are set during that period of expansion, but I don't necessarily think that the story at their core is the story of the Malazan expansion. I think that is more about the setting, and what we're investigating is actually, well, for me at least, obviously, like, every reader gets different things out of it. But for me, it was the personal stories of specific characters, seeing their evolution.
Through the personal lens, I would say, we're in the period of the expansion of the Malazan Empire. And as we sympathize with these characters, these personal stories within this broader context, the fact of the matter is, some of them are on the side of this expansionist empire that is committing some atrocities, frankly. And I'm a big fan of some of these characters. I love these characters, but they are participating in.
Sorry, Philip, for a moment there, I thought you were going to say, I'm a big fan of atrocities. And I went, finally, the nemesis has admitted that he's evil.
I'm sorry to disappoint you. So, no, some of these characters, I love some of these characters. And yet, when I think about it, what you're doing right now is resulting in the deaths of a lot of innocent people. And how do I feel about that? Yeah.
But that moral complexity, because again, that moral complexity has always been at the heart of a lot of Malazan storytelling, regardless of which author has been doing it. And even when we think of some of the elements that the characters we really loved in Gardens of the Moon, what they did, and you go, but when you actually list their actions, you go, so these are the characters you like that performed these things, that were trying to do this, and you're like, well, when you put it like that, those technically would be war crimes. You're like, yes, they would. But A, it's not our world, but also B, we're getting an insight into the complexity of what a person is. And depending on where you are standing, depending on where that lens is, you can approve of actions or you can disapprove of actions. The same action that when you're standing in one position, you see it as justified. But when you look at it from the other position, you see it as an abhorrent abuse of power. Now, this doesn't apply to everything, but that is a question that plagues us in today, where in our society today, we have a tendency to long for overly simplistic, overly reductive, nice, neat, clean lines that delineate everything. And for the most part, we don't like it when it's messy. We don't like it when we have to admit that someone on the other side of an argument has a number of points that, well, okay, yes, like I'm still on this side of the argument, but you're not entirely wrong. We don't like doing that because we like to be entirely right. We like them to be entirely wrong. And job's a good one. There we go. Nice, neat, clean lines. But quite frequently, it is, when it comes to real life, it is far more messy than that. Yeah. And we can agree in general terms, oh, X is wrong. But when you get down into the specifics, when you get down into the nitty gritty, when you start actually dealing with the practicalities of any of the different things, it becomes quite often infinitely more complex. Yeah. I think that is something that is interesting in what they explore. There are personal loyalties that we see in this book, and we can respect the personal loyalty while we may not necessarily approve of what they do. That you can respect their loyalty, but you
Yeah.
go, but what that loyalty led them to do, I'm not sure I'm 100% with.
Yeah, because okay, you're displacing some corrupt authority through your expansionist empire, but and I can get with, yeah, they're bad, so they deserve to be displaced. But in the process of displacing them, you're disrupting a lot of lives, you're killing people, you're and then you're putting yourself in power. I'm not sure I'm okay with that, right? Even though, okay, the person that you're doing this to, maybe their ancestors did it to someone else. So, there's a
Well,
lot of that in here.
well, okay. Why don't we go to a spoiler section, because I think now
Yeah.
we're talking around things because we don't want
Yes.
to give too much away.
Might
So
as well
for
do
those of you
that.
still watching, thank you very much for watching. If you don't want any spoilers, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. For those that are
Fortunate.
okay with spoilers or have already read it, this is the spoiler section.
So what actually are we spoiling? Just Forge of the High Mage?
Well, and any of the books prior.
Any
Um,
of the past to Ascendancy books?
yeah,
Okay. Because you don't
I
really
think
have
it
to
is safe to
spoil
assume
it.
that book four in a series, we can talk about books 1 to 3 if we
Yeah.
want to.
But interestingly, though, I think this book is, for me, not quite as linked as the first three. Like there's a separation of a sort. And I think I could actually talk about this if I wanted to without spoiling anything in books 1 through 3. I don't know.
And I think you can see the original sort of structure then. The books 1 to 3 were originally basically in a trilogy, a short series.
Yeah.
And then this was intended to be a separate project. And it's like, but no, we can actually carry on with this. So it's linked to, but this is almost like a sequel series to
Yeah.
the other one, rather than being the fourth book in a series. And
Right.
there's a lot of different interesting things that we could say about the difference between series and serial and the narrative structure and all of these different things that apply to books in series or films in series. But
Right.
let's save that for a different video where I go off on a long rambling rant.
Wait, isn't that every video? Oops.
You're gonna make me cry.
Oh no. No, I feel bad.
It's okay. I'm gonna find another amusing picture just to put over your face again. Like,
Uh-oh. Wait, I have to be careful when you're the one who's recording. Yeah.
yeah. You see, the thing I should have actually saved the cat pirate one for this, given the whole nautical theme and the
Oh,
nautical aspect of this, because
that's true.
we know, like from Malaz history in general, Malaz Island was a piratical island,
Oh yeah.
but how did Kellamved get rid of all of the pirates? And this book is how we find out.
Yeah.
He took over, but trying to get all of these pirates to line up under your banner, that's actually quite difficult. And now we know how it all happened.
Yeah. Yeah. He's pretty much swept up all the scum of the Malaz Island, and I assume other parts of Quontali, the continent. But yeah, I mean, and then threw them at the poor Falarians, I guess.
And let's face it, this has historical precedent. Or are people unaware of the freebooters and sorry privateers working on behalf of certain powers in various wars, sanctioned piracy?
I mean, you could look at the settling of the American West, or Texas, for example, where you had these colorful characters going in there first and making possible the eventual incorporation of these territories. So yeah, it's kind of how it works. Yeah.
So what did I'm actually quite curious. What did you think of getting that glimpse inside Moonspawn? Because this to me was in part similar to Orb Scepter Throne, little
Uh-huh.
sort of glimpse there. but still quite different from how Erickson had ever really depicted it.
Yeah, no, that I mean it's pre Gardens of the Moon, Moonspawn, where and of course we don't get the inside Moonspawn in Gardens of the Moon. So it's an interesting view. We don't see a ton of Animander Rake or Animandaris, as he's called in here. I was waiting for that. I was gonna come on, where's Animander? I want to see him. I got my glimpse, and he's just kind of distracted. He it almost seems like he's more of a professor than an overlord.
Well, that one of the things that Esslemont did that I quite appreciated was the almost horror and gothic feel that was present in those scenes. It made Moonspawn feel truly alien, which at the end of Memories of Ice, obviously there's that glimpse, but it's in a very specific circumstance, and because of the point of view, that glimpse is quite human.
Yeah.
In Orb Scepter Throne, again, it is from a human perspective, and it's looking at things in a certain way. But this is entirely the Teist on their own.
Teist and perspective, yeah.
And it, to me, reading those sections, that it actually felt quite alien and almost gothic horror. And
we probably shouldn't forget that Moonspawn is alien even for the Teist ND, because of course it's a Kachane Chamal artifact or vessel or whatever we're calling it. I guess artifact is the moving mountain that is at the center of the plot here. But yeah, it's interesting because we do get Endis Silon as the main perspective of the only perspective character for the Teist ND. And one other Teist ND character who plays a somewhat minor role is Feral, who is mentioned, I think, in Erickson's series in let's see, which one is it?
Fairly sure is it the
Toll the Hounds? Toll the Hounds, I think. Toll the Hounds, I think.
I have to be very careful here. Feral's interesting.
Oh, I know why you're being so coy. Okay. Okay, well, it figures that, I mean, because, yeah, hundreds of thousands of years go by and names might change in that period. So I'm making my guesses, but interesting character who is mentioned in Toll the Hounds.
But certainly that aspect of the storyline and how it interacted, you could see that the main thrust of it, I think we could divide it into two main arenas.
Yeah.
The Malazan expansion or the Malazan sort of trip across the ground, predominantly from Tatian's perspective.
Yeah.
And then the storyline about the religion of Mael and the Falari.
Right. With Gianna very much at the heart of that one.
Yeah. And I think that would be a fair way to kind of, those are the two main areas. But you also have, linked to that would be Kellanbed and Dancer, because that's linked to the Malazans and what they're up to.
The Twisted.
You have, and they're on the Twisted. They're the naughty nauticals.
Yeah. You guys, the Crimson Guard brought in, which is, I appreciated their perspective and the little meetings between them and some of the Malazans. That was an interesting, okay, we're going to have to cooperate here, and I'll just pretend I don't know who you are, but I know who you are. Those moments were cool.
But one of the things I find really interesting about that is, and it's something that I think can be quite jarring for us, which you'd alluded to earlier, which is when you're writing around in the perspective of a character, and we take their view of the world for granted. So if they go, that person is scary, that person is powerful, that person is dangerous, we go, oh, they must be really powerful leaders. And then when we are in that character, if we switch to that other character, they might be going, oh, no, but they're scary. You go, but hang on, they fear you. And it's that idea that sometimes we don't know our own abilities. We don't know how other people perceive us.
Right.
And I think that gets played with very neatly in that scene where you have Tatian and Dassam meeting up with the Crimson Guard within the Kachin Chamal artifact.
Yeah.
They basically, it's like the two quest parties running into each other, and it's like, what do we do?
Yeah, it was great. Plus you get additional insight into the split of the Crimson Guard. So the avowed and the disavowed, as we'll eventually learn about them in novels of the Malazan Empire. So that was a cool tie-in as well, because you have two of the characters, and it's clear by the end of Forge of the High Mage who's going to side with who. You have Skinner, of course. Two of them are going to go with Skinner. That's Jacinth and Gwyn. And two of them are going to go back to, well, Shimmer, I guess, because Kaz is already missing, I guess. Is that what's happened?
And when you think of that factionalism, so you look at what Malak Rel is doing with factionalism within the religion.
Yeah.
You look at how Kalimvet has exploited the factionalism of the pirates.
Right.
Then you look at the beginnings of a faction developing within the Malazan army, the worship of Dasim versus loyalty to everyone else. And
Surly too is doing her own thing. I mean, she's already she sent the assassin. She sent Topper after Ulara, right? I mean, she's doing her own thing, and there's tension, serious tension going on there.
And then when you bring up Ulara, look at the factionalism that develops there.
Yeah.
With, oh, we're not going to do that. We're going to disobey your orders.
Within the Jack. Yeah.
And so that idea of factionalism, that idea of the splintering of what from externally we perceive as a unit. But when you get inside, it's the swirling eddies of these various factions and competing desires that when you're in it, that's when you can see a lot of what is going on. So someone who maybe doesn't like the Malazan books will talk about the Malazan fandom. And yet, if you're in the Malazan fandom, you go, well, no, but there's that sort of fandom, and then there's this bit of the fandom, and then there's that bit over there. And then no one talks to him. He's just weird. He's out on his own. But
hey, stop talking about me.
But once you're within a construct, that's when you see these fracture points, when you see this factionalism. And because we move around, we start to realize that these cohesive positions or unified positions are actually a lot more fluid and dynamic.
Yeah.
And I just think it was really nice the way that Esslemont played with that on the micro scale of that small group who is it Singer, the Jagged, who's making them.
He's the Jagged, yeah.
But even
appeared in the previous Path to Ascendancy book, by the way. He's not. The name comes up when Sister of Cold Knights recognizes him, right? He's that one that was assisting the king in, it was the whole controversy around what was the city they were besieging.
Wasn't Inta.
I'll look at the map.
Which
Li Hang.
Hang.
That's the one they were besieging. And he was, he's the one that froze the, Anyway, we've seen him before. Yeah.
But on that micro scale, you have that tiny little quest group fracturing.
Yeah.
And then we have it on the macro scale. So we get to see it play out on all these different levels. That this is one of these fundamental things that transcends the micro and the macro across the whole novel.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting to do because, Feral is who she is, and you look at how she treats Endist, whereas you see how Endist treats Animander.
Not to mention Feral's just killing people with, or anyway, they're Kachin Shamal, but while they're sleeping, and she's like, "Who are you?" "Oh, Nightchill. Okay, I'm gonna kill you too." Boom, Whoa, what is wrong with this lady?
And I think one of the exciting things in it is there are some big climactic sequences with it.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, there's a giant mountain that is basically rolling over everything, and then there's a giant freaking wave that, and you talk about a convergence. Whoa, mountain and wave, boom, nice.
the nice symbolism of fire and water, the two
Yeah,
conflicting aspects.
yeah,
Um, so I'm curious as to what you thought of Tatian's journey in this as a
yeah.
character.
Tatian is. I love that you brought up Tatian because you and I have been having this ongoing discussion about your favorite High Mage. I know, AP, you used to be a Tatian hater. I know, and it's hard to move on from these things. But I feel like Esslemont has given us some real insights into good old Tatian and where he's coming from. I mean, if you just read the Malazan Book of the Fallen, particularly if you just read the first book,
Yeah.
yeah, the first Guardians of the Moon, you think Tatian is the worst. You think he's evil, that he's just a horrible person. You can't think that after reading Esslemont's books. I
I
can't.
can, but it takes an awful lot of effort and ignoring a whole lot of evidence.
Yeah, I mean, we really get in Tatian's head, and we look at his evolution here and his moving into this role, and also how different he is in the way he moves socially. Like he is not. I don't know what label I would use here. Maybe some people would say he's autistic. That would be, I think, an acceptable label for Tatian from my very admittedly ignorant perspective. But he is different in the way he interacts with people. And that's so well handled in Forge of the High Mage. And Esslemont's done stuff with that before as well. And you realize where Tatian is coming from and what he's trying to do and how the gaps that he has in interacting with people explain a lot, I think, of the perception of him, of outsiders. And it's so endearing to have some of them are common soldiers, others are people like Dancer. There's a kind of growing, not just, wow, he's cool, but affection even for Tatian, which I enjoyed a lot.
And I thought that for me was one of the nice moments when the soldiers respected the fact that Tatian stood his ground and kept trying, even though it wasn't working. And it failed in that moment.
Right.
But he didn't run away. And the soldiers around him respected that he wasn't some mage who went, oh, that didn't work, and then just walked off to leave them all to die. He stood his ground. And of course, that's something that Dujek criticizes him for.
Yeah.
Because they don't have that many mages at this stage. So losing Tatian in that moment would have been disastrous.
Mm. Well, plus he's just super powerful as well. I mean, he's a huge asset. Yeah.
He ends up becoming and accessing greater levels of power because he starts, and I think it is slightly different to when they gamed it, because I don't think this is how you would game it, but pushing yourself to your limit, then pushing past that to see, is that actually my limit? And you find this with, like, you must have done this with marathon running, that
Oh yeah,
there are those things where you go, no, I can't do anymore, that you reach that barrier.
yep.
But actually you can.
My legs feel like toothpicks, but somehow I just keep running. Yeah.
But at the same time, if you pushed it too far,
yeah,
you could cause yourself serious injury. And when you're messing around with magic,
I did that too, by the way.
well, yes, I really see. That's why I think you're the perfect person to talk to about this. That in doing that, there was a barrier that you could push past.
Yep.
But there was a limit. And if you pushed past that, you ended up doing yourself serious harm. Now, think about that in terms of magery, that if you're accessing a warren and you're doing these little tricks and you go, yeah, and after this, oh, it's starting to get a wee bit, I'm not going to push any further. You haven't reached your limit. But if you push too far past your limit, we've seen what happens, which is, you can just disintegrate, you could just burn up, you can be destroyed, you could destroy everyone around you because of this unleashed power. So the danger of a misstep is very, very high. And we see when Tatian starts pushing past that, and why it was the self-imposed limit was actually holding him back.
Yeah.
I think that was an interesting point.
Very interesting. And I love how Nightchill is the one who recognizes his potential early on. And of course, we know a lot about her from, I mean,
We
previous
think we
books.
know a lot about her.
I mean, I know because of other series, and I mean, there are things I know about her that I wouldn't necessarily just know from Esslemont, I guess, but most of what I know about her is from Esslemont, I think. But anyway, it was cool to see her recognition of Tatian's potential. Plus, oh, we got sort of, I mean, not exactly origin story, but we see her and Bellardan interacting, and they've known each other a very long time. But I had to wonder, is this the beginning of them being lovers? It's not on page or anything, but Bellardan basically rescues her in a certain moment when she's been stabbed by that crazy feral lady and brings her to heal. And I wonder if that's where they got really close or what. But anyway, very cool to see these characters that you know from later, you know, from Gardens of the Moon, and you don't get to see Nightchill really a ton in Gardens of the Moon, do you? But cool to see them together.
I thought the antagonism and the friction points between, say, like Herlock and Tatian
Oh,
and
Hairlock, yes, yeah.
that like Herlock is just despicable.
I
But
mean, I'm kind of okay with him ending up where he ends up in Gardens of the Moon.
and the thing is, yeah, he's kind of despicable, but he's not always wrong. That's the annoying thing. He is not
That's
always
true.
wrong.
Like he sees it, he says to Tatian too, "You're coming from here, buddy. You need to come from here, you know, from your guts. You need to, you know." And he's right. Tatian realizes. He also, I love the moment where Tatian is like, you know, I think maybe he's really not a very nice person. You know. It's like, oh yeah, Tatian. I think everybody else sort of caught on to that a little bit earlier, that he's not the nicest person.
So it's there are aspects of it that getting these glimpses, because these are characters we think we know, and I think one of the difficulties that prequels always have is we generally know where a character ended up.
Yeah.
But if a character began that way, there would be no character arc, no character growth. They would just be static all the way through. And so sometimes I think when these characters have been where we meet them in this book or in earlier books, and they go, but that doesn't match my image of who that character is. Okay.
Right.
Well, yeah, they haven't become that person yet. They have to get there. That it still takes time.
Yeah.
And I think that can be jarring, because trying to understand the evolution of someone like Tatian, how did he end up that way?
Yeah.
And we haven't seen all of those events yet, but we now have a better idea of the core of who he is.
Right.
And I think that was what you were pointing at in terms of it helps us reconcile a bit better why he acted in certain ways in other stories, that we
When he
understand
needs
his
certain
core.
cues. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Oh, speaking of which, I mean, what you're talking about, maybe we could also use this as a segue to talk about the Falarian stuff with Gianna and Malik Rel and so forth. But
sorry, Malik Rel the Merciful.
that Malik Rel, yes. But no, what I found fascinating was our this really cool look at Mael, Mael, Mael. I mean, this was, I think, one of the characters I felt like I got the most insight into, besides Tatian, was possibly Mael. And I always wondered, so I guess this is spoilers for Midnight Tides and all that. I don't know.
Why did he end up doing what he did in Midnight Tides?
Exactly. How did he end up with the character he's with, famously, in Midnight Tides, with the concerns that he has, seemingly a very, and you can see it in here too, a seemingly benign figure who is very deeply, I think, touched and concerned with humanity in some very endearing ways. But how do you square that with this barbaric religion where all these blood sacrifices and all of this, you know, oh, male's wrath, and all we have to appease and throw some kids at him, slit their throats. And how do you reconcile this gentle figure that we meet here? I mean, even in here, he doesn't seem, he's been imprisoned, okay? He's probably been thinking for a long time, I would guess.
He's been on a timeout. He's been on a timeout. He's had a time to think about what he did.
Okay. Was he a ruthless, like bloodthirsty god at any time in his history? Because I feel like we're getting a misinterpretation of the religion that worships him in the hands of the current hierarchy of Falar, that these people, like the initial guy who's replaced by Malik, that Malik offs, throws, and has his bodyguard throw him down the stairs. That guy's a bloodthirsty, awful person. So I wasn't too sad when he was thrown down the stairs. But these people are all misinterpreting what was actually, it's clear from the scrolls that are in the bronze box, this was not originally, the Gistal was not originally an aggression type thing. It was a thing for defense, right?
Let me ask you something. Can you think of any modern real world religion in which one of the central tenets is love one another, that has been used to justify some of the most horrendous acts in the world?
Turn the other cheek and all that. Love your neighbor. Yeah.
How people manipulate and use religion for their own gain. How they
so that's not male's fault. That's not male's fault.
How they reshape the lessons of that religion, or they recast the figure. But remember, I think one of the things that adds even greater complexity to this, because it's not just, I think, a manipulation of that. But when we think of the sea, when we think of the ocean, yes, it is life-giving. And we think of, you know, the healing waters and life coming from water, and it's necessary for our lives. And there are all of these very positive attributions that we grant to the sea, to the ocean, to all of this. It's also immensely destructive.
Mm-hmm. From a human perspective, yeah.
And that's the duality of male. That water as a symbol is changeable, mutable. It quite often is used in that way, but male can be destructive because that is part of his aspect.
Yeah.
It may not be the aspect he enjoys, but that's part of his role in the pantheon. And then we get into interesting theological questions about how much do his followers shape who he is, and how much does he get to control who he is.
Right. Yeah, I will say, though, that as far as the ocean or nature in general's destructiveness, often that's destruction that happens because we're the dummies that put ourselves in these positions where, through our own hubris, really, nature feels like an antagonist, but it's indifferent. It's not an antagonist. We're the dummies because of our assumption that we're you know, we got opposable thumbs and this amazing cranial capacity, so we can do whatever we want.
Building an entire city on a river floodplain is not a good idea.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And well, yeah. So, but with male in some respects being this personification of the sea, he can be both bloodthirsty. Like the sea takes lives, but at the same time, life-giving. And I think that duality is necessary. But we see in the prologue, what the cult of the Gistal was. That was a cult. That was an offshoot. That was something very, very specific. And that's what Malak Rel recovers at the very beginning in order to claim control of the sacred text, so no one else can gainsay his interpretation of the religion.
Right. And when we see that prologue, which happens hundreds of years before the main story, that religion has already been deformed. It has already been twisted into what it's not. I mean, in its original or older form, it's far more benign. And even the Gistal itself, as we learn from those scrolls, it wasn't meant to be what they made it into. And I have to wonder if Male's imprisonment has something to do with the fact that they were able to use the Gistal the way they did, right? If he had not been imprisoned, perhaps they would not have been able to do that.
And we can make theories and suppositions all we like, but I think that is like a fascinating element of this. And that's what I had said at the beginning about these different power dynamics and the interplay of power in it. Because Malak Rel is clearly like the political machinations he goes through, but it's to take control of a religion, and religion is controlling how the people believe and support him. And then, oh, well, we lost to a secular power. Time to ingratiate myself in there, because it was never about belief.
Yeah.
And even like Jan, that her belief in this is not particularly strong. It's not a true belief in the god, but there's
she hates Male. Right.
But there's an instinctive spirituality and her faith, belief, and love of the ocean. That is pure.
Yeah.
Because we see when she is diving, we see her interaction with that medium. And she loves and reveres the actual ocean. And who is the ocean? But that's Male. So you can see she's true to the spirit, but not the dogma.
Yeah, absolutely. But interestingly, it seems to me, and this is not you don't have to be a genius to put this together. Male is using her in order to bring back this faith to something more like it was in with his intentions. In other words, he is absolutely using her, Gianna, the high priestess, or Giandra, or whatever. She prefers herself as Gianna, so yeah, that's what she prefers. But he is definitely using her to undermine the powers that be that have appropriated this religion and made it into something aggressive and dominating. And he's trying to bring it back to something more benign, I think. I mean, he clearly doing that. And there's that moment when she's been sucked down in there, and he's rescued her, and there's that sacrificial blade that he stabbed his own hand with on the altar, and we see a little bit of his blood, and I think from his palm, perhaps a bead of it, right? And then the knife disappears. It's almost as if this is a symbolic moment where, yeah, I'm getting rid of this brutal, bloodthirsty religion, and I want to bring it back to, and by freeing Gianna, he's hoping that she'll be helping him to bring this about, right?
And that is the wonderful thing about reading symbolism and themes into a work. We can agree, here's what happened in the scene. What does the scene mean? That's where we get this extrapolation. We see it connecting to other aspects of the story that we have read. What were your thoughts on Kellanved and Dancers? They do not figure as predominantly in this story as in some of the previous.
Yeah. So if we think of the previous 3 installments in Path to Ascendancy, that becomes less true with each of the books, actually, but they're more or less centered on Kellanved and Dancer and how they got together and their hijinks and all that. But yeah, here they are just a couple of the characters in this larger cast. And as we said in the beginning, I think Gianna is a more important character overall. Taishran is a more important character overall, which doesn't surprise me in many ways, considering some of Esslemont's other books, that Taishran would be as important as he is. But yeah, Dancer is a character that fascinates me because actually in some ways more than Kellanved, because I love Kellanved. He's crazy, and he's a bit, he and Malak Rel have a lot in common, by the way, in many ways. But we like Kellanved and we hate Malak for some reason, even though they're actually very similar.
I think it's the green teeth.
Maybe it's the teeth. It's got to be the teeth. But Kellanved is a bit of a caricature in many ways. He's fun, he's vivid, he's interesting, but he's a bit of a caricature. He's a madman who's, we're never quite sure, is he doing this on purpose? Is he a genius, or is he just freaking lucky or some combination of that. So he's fascinating, but I actually find Dancer to be the more compelling, especially when you put all the different series together and you look at the evolution of this character, who is an assassin with a very, very large heart, which doesn't really work very well, does it? And he's an assassin at the heart of an expansionist empire who feels bad for, the way people get hurt. So his relationship with Ulara is a perfect encapsulation of that. I think that he hears about her being targeted by Surly, and he's like, "You have to get me there right now." And Callum says, "Okay." And he brings him there. That was very touching, by the way, because earlier in the series, we're spoiling past Ascendancy. So way back in Dancer's Lament, she was somebody who helped him a lot, and there was a bit of a romantic interest going on. And because he's had all the high dental healing, he doesn't look like he's aged as much as she has, and she's really sacrificed a lot of herself for the Jack. So she's an old woman now, and he still looks like a young man, but there's still that spark, I think, between them. I just found that it's a really beautiful part of the story.
One of the things that I find fascinating about that is, what if Ulara hadn't been with the Jack? What do you think Dancer's reaction would have been?
Spoilers.
I might try and bleep that out. That was a slip, sorry.
I mean, it's very unlikely that somebody would be watching this who hasn't read the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So, but anyway.
I know, but I didn't do that on purpose. But
I know.
What would you think Dancer's reaction would have been had Ulara not been there?
That's a very good question. Would he have intervened? Probably not, because he had this personal connection to her. He did the humanitarian thing, but he's part of this expansionist empire. And if he hadn't known her, he would have been like, "Oh, Surly wants to kill somebody. All right,
Because that is what they do. He is an assassin. It's, oh, well, if we take out the leadership of that troublesome group, then it's going to be easier to defeat them. That's been their plan that they've used multiple times, that they go in and they take out the most important people or the most competent people.
Yep.
And then it's, oh, hang on, she's going to do that to someone I know, someone I like, someone I owed my life to. Right. Let's go. And it's not to take away from it being a wonderful moment, but it's a lot more complicated when we think of the flip side of that coin. And that's one of the things that I like about both Erikson and Esslemont, is they encourage us to look at that flip side. It's not just what happened, but the why it happened and what would have happened slightly differently. That you're meant to be thinking about those things, that they are popped into our heads. And certainly Dancer as a character of the two, you are absolutely right. To my mind, he is the more human, the more humane.
Yeah.
And Calamved is the more larger than life, the more almost of a caricature of someone who is not quite believable. And yet,
becomes more and more a shadow than human, basically, right? Yeah.
And yet this is one of the few books where I think I actually felt for him when he is faced off against the Gistel and is like, I'm gonna try this. There's a real feeling that he might actually fail. Like when they're faced off against the pirate fleet, and he's pushing himself to the limits. That there are moments of real frail humanity.
He acknowledges that to Tatian. He says, "Yeah, pal, I get you. I know what it's like to be pushed past what you thought your limits were." Right.
And that surprised me, because so much of Calamved is that, is he mad? Is he a genius? Is he both? Is he neither? All of that sort of conversation. We sometimes completely forget the humanity of the character because he does, like certain other characters, dresses it up in a certain way. He projects an aura and character that insulates him from people knowing him.
Well, this is true if you look at his story as a progression. What Esslemont's given us is the development of Kellanved and Dancer, and we see Dancer's conflict, but we also see how Kellanved becomes less and less and less human and more and more and more shadow until he becomes what we see in the later chronologically series that I'm not going to spoil like some people.
Okay, well,
Right.
is there anything else that you wanted to bring up in
Oh
this?
gosh, I'm sure we've forgotten something, AP, haven't we?
Oh, we there's loads of stuff that we haven't talked about.
Yeah. I mean, oh my goodness.
But it's Esslemont, so there had to be ships in it. Yeah, check. Yeah, got that.
Carthrin Crust. We didn't talk about Carthrin, who's I mean, when you have the Twisted, you got to have Carthrin there. And I love how the Twisted is this ragged, decrepit, thing. And then the Noct is also part of this as well, which is your typical Malazan randomness thrown in there for good measure, right?
What did you think about meeting the younger Dujek?
Oh, that was fun. He had just recently lost his arm. So he had just earned his nickname, I guess. Yeah, no, I loved his constant conflict about strategy, whether he's doing this right. Oh, I'm going to get demoted to latrine cleaner here. But also there's a very personal, among these people who got this empire rolling, they're friends. There's a bond there from this experience, and you really see it with Dujek. Surly even likes Dujek. I mean, he's got to have a pretty nice personality, and yeah, I mean, he has this personal worry when Dancer and our friend the Sword. We haven't even talked about Dassam at all. And I mean, he is worried because his friends are in danger when they're on the Kachain Chimal artifact, the mountain thing. He's worried for them because they're his friends, but also because, I mean, they're trying to this campaign. He has this weight of responsibility on him. So as a soldier, right, he's got that aspect to him. So yeah, it was really quite a good, I thought, development of his character in here.
Yeah, and it was certainly fun to get, I think, again, spend some time with Dassam, and to see that beginning of where Dassam's sword comes from, where we met Farul and the various others over time, but where that originated, how it developed.
It's just starting, and yeah.
And you can see those elements, and we can see why it potentially is destabilizing.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think I greatly appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's really, I think, seen as a rival. Now, Taishran doesn't look at Dassam as a rival. He's just curious. He's like trying to understand, oh, maybe I'm actually more like Dassam because I have some ambitions, and he's trying to figure things out. I think the primary rivalry that we see really starting to come out here is Surly, who is naturally not going to be a big fan of Dassam, right? He's too charismatic, too much of an obvious, I think, successor, because Kellanved is increasingly off and becoming more and more shadow, and so yeah, I mean, Dassam probably was seen more and more as a threat because of his charisma. I have to wonder, what do you think? Does Dassam realize that others are seeing him this way? Is he just doing what he does as a natural part of his personality as a soldier? Is he cultivating this deliberately? I don't think so. I think he's just being who he is. Other people assume, oh, he's ambitious. Look at him. Look at how he wins the soldiers over. I think he does it just naturally, but they see that.
I don't think he is trying to cultivate it. When we saw him in the earlier books, and he was the priest of Hood, and like he went through, he was dispensing wisdom and being caring and empathic about things, and also wielding a sword. And Dassam is Dassam. That's who he is, and his desire to do the right thing, to be down there on the front line with the other soldiers, so that you can't ask them to risk their necks if we're not going to risk ours. That his attitude, you can see why it breeds loyalty.
Right.
It breeds worship, in addition to his consummate skill. Like, he is incredibly skilled. So if he's down on the front line and he's standing there and he's fighting these things off, then you as a soldier, you go like, he's saved my life about like 20 times in this last fight. Or you can see how that will build and build and build into hero worship.
Yeah.
And I don't think that he is specifically cultivating it, not in the way, say, that Malak Rel is trying to cultivate worship and cultivate power. That's
Right.
that's very ambitious. Kellenved even is slightly different. It's like we need to do this because this is destabilized, and we need it stable, and we need them to stop doing that thing. So if we just take it over, then that's that bit quiet. Then we can sort out that problem that's over there. Kellenved is falling into creating an empire. It isn't his goal to go, oh, the empire must expand. It's, there's an issue here, this needs to be dealt with. You go that way, that we'll sort that out. We'll do, oh, another thing has happened over here. Send Whiskey Jack and that army over there to deal with that. He's unknowingly creating an empire.
Yeah.
As a consequence. Dassam is unknowingly creating a cult around himself. Malak Rel is knowingly trying to suborn an entire religion.
Very different. He's doing it very deliberately.
Herlock is a scumbag who is, weaseling his way because he wants to be the High Mage, and yet no one is having any of it because they all think they all despise him.
Right. What did you feel bad for Glyneth, the abbess? Because I feel very torn about her, because she's mean to Gianna, and even like is happy about the idea of Gianna being sacrificed or suffering, and she's ambitious, clearly, on in her own way, but she is so used by Malak Rel, particularly at the end when she's basically the fall guy or fall gal, who is blamed for everything that Malak does. And we see Malak worming his way out of this by basically putting it all on Glyneth, who we know is innocent in this case.
I'm surprised you didn't make a comparison to a certain literary critic. But I think we have a tendency to feel bad for people who are victims, and she was put in a difficult position. Now, she's not a nice person. We don't have to like her, but she was put in a very difficult position, and she tried to do her best, and then ultimately everything got blamed to her. We can feel that's an injustice.
Yeah.
There's also an aspect of trying to work out, does the punishment fit the crime? We'd have been happy with her to be punished, but the extent to which she is punished might seem excessive. So there's an aspect of that. And then we can get into questions of restorative versus retributive justice, and different aspects of what we mean by justice. But yeah, I think you can feel some sympathy for her at the end, because we all know that Malak Rel is the one behind everything. He deserves it. And he's pushed all of that onto someone else. They're guilty of their own thing. They don't need to be blamed for someone else's crimes.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent. We haven't talked a ton about Hessa and Turnagin. Is it Turnagin or Turnagin? Turnagin?
You're asking me, who has been corrected so many times on how to pronounce things?
Hard G or soft G? I'm going to go with Turnagin. Could be wrong. I liked him. He's the mage. They're the shipwreck survivors who end up being basically kidnapped, I guess, or whatever, by Singer, coerced into being his crew. I thought Hessa was she ends up getting killed, unfortunately, by I do not want to meet one of those assassin, Kachane Chamal. What the heck are
Shaigal assassins?
Yeah, the Shaigal assassin. Ooh, man, those things. even Dassen was too slow for that thing. That's scary. I mean, I was already scared of them anyway from Malazan Book of the Fallen, but man, ugh. But I felt bad for poor Hessa, who was really a decent person.
Well, kind of a pirate captain, really.
But a nice one.
It, fantasy has this bizarre thing that it does where, you know, pirates and assassins and thieves, and we go, oh yeah,
like Torva, the smuggler, the old smuggler guy, Torva. I mean, I love the guy. He's a thief, a criminal, right?
Yeah, but we look at them and go, oh yeah, but they were nice, they were heroes, they were good people. But
Yeah.
the assassin, the guy that gets paid to murder people, he's a good guy. You're like, yeah, I like him. It's fantasy has this really bizarre thing that we just ignore morally reprehensible deeds in certain circumstances. Oh yeah, because they're nice. We like them. But no, that I thought that was a lot of fun of seeing how, because obviously that's what Moonspawn is. Moonspawn is the Taistandi taking over Akachin, possibly Naruk,
No. Yeah.
Citadel. But seeing how people can find these things and they try to take them over, but it's not easy, because if the person wakes up, like all of those Kachin were asleep, and they might have been in deep hibernation, they mightn't have been fully awake, they might have been sick, there was an illness, that's why they were all hibernating. But the scenes of them wandering around this quite alien place,
Yeah,
and the implication of the technology that the Kachin have, or the Naruk might build or have. This seemed to be an earlier sort of iteration of the Kachin hive, because it was a hover mountain, not a flying one.
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then another interesting element to this we haven't talked about is Imanaj, the Seven Cities native from Aaron. And the ending was just great. I mean, he comes home and he's greeted by this great ceremony, and there's his mother wanting to see, where have you been? And she's the I don't know what her role is, but some great title. And then the last thing that's said is, we don't have to worry about these Malazans. Like, what a bunch of riffraff. Right? The irony of this scene is just really cool. Yeah.
And you know, that was a nice moment. I think one of my favorite moments actually with him was when he was sitting on the island, and they, you know, the island's being raided, and they're like, oh, you must defend us.
Right.
And just let them take things. Like let them take whatever they want to take. Then they'll go away. Everything will be fine.
Exactly.
It's just stuff. Hang on. Are,
Yeah.
are they taking the lumber that I needed for my boat? Hey, guys,
Dang.
listen, I get it. I see what you're doing. You can have everything, but leave the lumber that I need.
Give
Because
me my wood.
as soon as it's impacting him,
Yeah.
and they're like, no, like we're taking it, and then we see that, and that fight in the surf, I thought was a different way to do it, and it was actually quite interesting and a lot of fun.
It was really well done. Yeah. Yeah. The way he has to keep, because there's the one guy with the crossbow, that he has to keep somebody between him and that guy. So that's part of the whole choreography here that he's trying to do. And yeah, it was a really brilliantly done scene, I thought. Yeah.
But it was interesting for me because obviously we've always seen fights on beaches, fights in a forest, but fighting in the water is actually quite different. It's very difficult, that
very
pressure
hard
against your legs and trying to move through it.
Yeah. Off balance. Yeah.
It added an interesting dimension to it for me.
Yeah. And of course he had already dispatched his 5 comrades who had come to bring him back to 7 cities. Yeah. I don't think he ever comes up again. I don't recognize him as anything, but you don't have to say anything.
I won't. I am not going to say.
Oh, all right, fine.
Okay, well, I think that's been fairly comprehensive in a lot of the different things that we've talked about, and
yeah,
you know, I've tried to be circumspect in the things that I've said. But
Yeah.
you know, I enjoyed the book. I can't help it. So Philip, thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure, my friend. I mean, nemesis. Yeah.
Do you have any closing thoughts about the book that you want to
Oh, it's a brilliant book. If you're a Malazan reader, just you're gonna love this. Well, if you're listening to us now, you probably read it already. But yeah, I loved it. I absolutely love it. I think Esslemont is a great writer, and just for me, one of the my favorite writers of fantasy that's currently out there. And this, you know, as a you know, he's had all these moving parts in this, which he brought together. Really, this might be actually, in some respects, some of his very best writing as well. I didn't talk about that, but there's a lot of elements that he brings together here, very disparate. And then I thought the convergence aspect of this was really well done. So I enjoyed that tremendously. So yeah.
Well, you never know. We might, if you find a passage that you think would be worthwhile talking about, you can come back and the two of us can have a look at a written passage and have a discussion about the style of writing and the things going on. Now that you're an author.
Yes. Author. Yeah.
But thank you very much, my friend. And for those of you still watching, thank you for watching. Thank you for your continued support. And I will see you in the next one.